All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Faith Unwavered podcast, episode 5. So glad to have you joining us. I hope you've enjoyed our previous podcast that we've had over the last several weeks. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from those that have heard and or listened to them and watched them. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody who's helped us out. But today we're back with another topic that I think is going to be a pretty good one. And I hope you're going to be interested in it. I hope you've enjoyed the other topics. We're going to sidestep our discipleship series today, and we'll pick it back up next week. But for this week, we're going to talk about that question that I hear from a lot of people over the years. Why does church feel differently now than it did 20 years ago? What's the reason behind that? Why do we feel that way? Is it some kind of a disconnect? Is it some kind of a change? Is church better? Is it worse? Is it in between? I don't know, but I hear feedback from people all the time, and they just look back at those old days, the old days of church that you remember, and they just remember them better than what maybe they are today. Now, not everybody's like that, so that might not be you, but we are going to be talking about that and why maybe does it feel different and what is making the difference in today's church world. So if you feel that way, you are not the only one that feels that way. And as we discuss a lot of the things that we're going to discuss over the course of today's show, I just want to throw this out there. I'm not looking to really criticize anything or anyone's opinion as much as I just want to kind of delve into this thought and kind of unpack it and figure out, what might cause us to feel that way. What are some of the changes between church 20, 25 years ago and now? And so I just want to give an honest reflection as someone who's been in ministry for several years and was a pastor for several years, and hearing feedback from many different generations, the great ministry members that came before me, and those that I helped mentor and have helped come up. And so I've heard a lot of great things, and a lot of people do say that same thing. They say, man, church is better. Some say church is different. Some say it's a little bit less spiritual. So there's a lot of different ways that people come on. So I don't know where you come from or where you come out at. Drop your post and comment below and let me know, what do you think? Where do you stand on that? But so, again, we're not looking to really blame anybody or bring criticism, but just kind of unpack it. So hopefully our discussion today is a blessing, and it gets you thinking about some different things and maybe how you look at church, because that's really one of the things we've been talking about in our cultural church culture kind of talks here from time and time again. So the one thing that I want to understand is that or consider and look at is that there definitely has been a shift. For those of you guys that feel like church was better 20, 25 years ago, there's definitely been a change. And I think everybody can acknowledge that the way we do church is different, right? And it's not just it's not just nostalgia. Okay. It's not just nostalgia. It's not just that longing for the way things used to be, right? I mean, maybe a little bit mixed in there, but it's really not just that, because if you look at the landscape of churches nowadays, things have definitely changed. And I talked about this in previous episode, but church attendance has changed. The level of commitment that members and family give church has definitely changed. So there's been a shift over the course of probably the last 2 to 2.5 decades that I think if you ask your local pastor, he would probably agree with that. And I think if you were honest and you looked at things, you'd probably think the same way. But the truth is that people still believe in church. People still love the church. But I think how people relate to the church, and I think how people look at the importance of church in their life has shifted as well. So it's not just so much how we do church, but how we perceive church and how we look at church that's changed. Some people feel a little bit disconnected. And if you didn't catch our episode on why I feel spiritually disconnected, I hope you would go back and check that out, because it's a really interesting episode. But a lot of people do feel a little bit disconnected. And it doesn't mean that you don't have faith because you feel disconnected, or that you've lost faith or anything like that. There's just like a disconnect. You feel like the change has made it different in a way that you can't necessarily relate to. And so cultural changes have been something that have shaped the church and changed over the last 20, 25 years. The rise of digital lifespan, right? Digital use, the effect that digital media has on our life. And I think not just so much our life in general, but also what it's doing to our attention spans. I am blessed to be a Bible teacher at a private Christian school, and I see these young people, their attention spans seem less and less, and all the kids are talking about how they just scroll. And when you really think about it and you get down to it, how we intake information is so different. Back in my oh my God, I can't believe I just said that, right? Like I'm some older person, because I'm not. But I remember the days of newspapers, right? I remember the days before everybody had a laptop and everybody had a cell phone and everybody had a computer and everybody had internet access, and information just didn't travel to you as quickly as it does now. And I think what the social media and the internet has kind of trained our brains in a way to do is to process things very quickly and to process things in quick blurbs. If you take a social media course or any kind of marketing, it's what stops the scroll, right? That's what's important. What can get you to stop scrolling and click on a link? Now, a lot of times when you're just sitting there on your phone looking at social media, you're not stopping. You're just scrolling. Cat video after cat video. This person's falling down. This person tripped and fell. Little comedic bit, meme, whatever it is, right? And we process those things so quickly that our attention spans have gotten so much shorter. And we go to church and we expect church to be 45 minutes to an hour. And a lot of people out there are looking back to 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And we're saying, man, we were in church for 3 hours. Some of us were in church for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And if you ask a young person today, if they wanted to be in church for 2 hours, they'd say, there's no way I could sit in a church service for 2 hours. There's no way I would want to listen to an hour and 5 minute sermon. But back in the 90s and prior, and there's still some churches that have longer services. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to just be so general that I miss out on a lot of things that are still going on. But our tolerance for length and of the length of time that we invest in the information that we take in has definitely changed. The consumer culture, and we talked about that, and finding a new church and looking at churches from the point of view of what can you do for me, as opposed to what can I do for the church? What does this church have to offer me? Does it meet my needs? It's such a self-centered way of looking at it. And I'm not saying that you don't consider those things, but it can't just be about you, right? Because you're part of a bigger body of Christ that needs you to be a part of and not just to be served, okay? We need you to serve. So there's those types of things that have made a difference. I mean, I think overall we've seen a decline in institutional trust. People trust the news less than ever. People trust the government less than ever. And unfortunately, I think that's true about the church too. I think for a lot of people out there, they don't trust the church as much as they used to. And so we see that possibly having an effect and a change in the way that churches construct their services. Political and social polarization has made a difference. Pastors get criticized all the time when they try to bring up something political, and it doesn't matter what side, left or right or in between or whatever. That doesn't matter. But the moment that a pastor starts to speak on politics, everybody starts to get up in arms and gets offended. Or if a pastor doesn't speak on politics or doesn't speak on a current issue, then you get the feedback. Well, he should have stood up. She should have stood up. He should have stood up and said something about that. And you find this weird dichotomy where it's like that old saying, and I'll say it without cussing, but you're messed over if you do, you're messed over if you don't. And it's a fine line that churches and pastors have to navigate, because I've seen political stances by leadership in churches really affect the overall mood of the church and even sometimes the attendance. So, that's another thing. Just overall busyness of families nowadays. People are so busy. And, you're working 50, 60 hours a week. You're driving your kids to all their clubs and games, and you're finding time to try to grocery shop in there. You're trying to find time for church. You're trying to find time for your spouse. You're trying to find time for your family. I mean, it's just so many things that are going on. That's definitely affected the way that people approach and look at church. And it's also affected how churches look at serving the people that are members. The next one that I want to bring up is delving a little bit more into how the churches look at it from the church's point of view. As being in someone who was in ministry for several years, youth ministry, lay ministry, just administrative help and leadership, and then a pastor and a youth leader. I know those conversations that the ministry teams have. Are we serving the needs of our people? Are our services too long? Are they too short? Is the worship long enough? Are we giving room for God to move while still trying to maintain some sort of a flow to where the service doesn't last 2 hours and people start walking out? Hopefully nobody does that at your church, but I've been at churches certainly where that has happened. The service was just running a little bit long and people had other things to do. So, but what I'm getting at is that those things have changed. I remember going to church, and I'm sure some of you that are listening right now remember, we would go to church, we would have an all-night prayer meeting or be at church from like 6:30 on a Sunday night. Sunday night, hey, that's another one, right? That's changed. So many churches don't even have Sunday night service. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but again, there's another notable change. But we used to go to church and stay from 6:30 till 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, whatever. And I know some of you are out there saying, oh my goodness, how could you possibly do that? But we were just trying to allow the Spirit of God to move and touch the hearts of people, and people were excited about what the pastor had to say and preach, and the worship, could go on, and we could just feel the presence of God. So do churches still feel those things? You might ask if you're one of those people that says, well, I miss those days. I miss those kind of moves of God, so to speak. Does God still move in that way? Well, of course he does. Of course he still moves in that way, and can move in that way. But again, churches are trying to best serve the people that they have in meeting their needs and understanding their time that their busy life. So that's definitely something. I mean, I think another shift that we've seen is we've kind of seen this shift away from like a discipleship model to more of a attraction model. And I remember for a while in the 90s and on up until the 2000s, and still I still hear it every once in a while from time to time from other ministries, where they went in and the church wanted to do like a seeker friendly kind of a thing, right? And we're trying to not use church lingo, and we're trying to make sure that our sermon is 20 to 25 minutes long, and 3 points and a rap, and 3 songs and 17 minutes or 13 and a half minutes or whatever it is. We're tightening things so much, and I think that sometimes we overcompensate. The churches overcompensate for that, and they don't allow God to move. And then I think the flip side is that there have been and still are some churches that let it run too long, and people do the attention spans of people do wane. And I wish I could say that people just in general want to be in that presence of God, but I think overall, again, it's just the way culture has become and is impacting us as individuals. Our attention spans tend to start wandering. We start thinking about where are we going to eat, and did I leave the stove on at home for Sunday afternoon dinner, and those kinds of things. Now, again, I'm not saying that anything's wrong with that, but these are the kind of things that people are discussing behind the scenes, probably in your church, because they're doing their best to try to make sure that they meet your needs. But we have seen that shift away from a more seeker friendly as opposed to a discipleship based model. Attraction, we're trying to replace sound doctrine, and a lot of times I think churches have replaced sound doctrine with with programs or events. And not that programs and events are wrong, are bad, because they're definitely not. A lot of times those programs and those events are meant to serve the people of the community or of the church. And so they are a blessing, but we can't sacrifice discipleship. And let me just throw that out there. If you're interested in discipleship, I just happen to be doing a series on discipleship. So we're two episodes into that series. We'll pick it back up next week. But there has been, I think, a shift on that. We have seen an increased emphasis on production and branding. It's all about the church brand. You got to have a cool logo, and the pastor's got to wear skinny jeans, and he's got to have a jacket on. He's got to have the layers, right? Or whatever the fashion look of the day is. We get worried about presentation, and we're forgetting that the most important part of it is discipleship. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't dress how you want to dress as a minister or whatever and feel comfortable in your own skin, but we can't get so focused on how we look and how we present and how the brand looks that we're sacrificing discipleship and connection and spiritual empowerment and strength and all of those things that really a good church, in my opinion, should have. Sermons are changing. It's three points, and then let me get out, 4 points, maybe a bonus point in there somewhere. And look, a lot of these ministers have been taught to teach in that format. A lot of public speakers in general just use that same typical format. I format my speech. I've got multiple points, 2 to 3, some sub points, and I'm tying it up at the end, and I'm getting out there. I mean, I have had classes on ministry and sermon structure and delivery, and all of those things are great and powerful. But what happens is, a lot of times I think what we're seeing is sermons become more topical and less doctrinal. Okay. Sermons have become more topical and less doctrinal. There has to be a balance. Okay. Your doctrine should be enforcing our sermons, right? Evangelism, the truth, the message, the mission of Jesus, and giving our life to God and growing a spiritual relationship. Now, do we need to talk about all these other topical cultural things and how it affects? Absolutely. But we can't go so far to one side that we're missing out on the doctrine. And I think some people are feeling that as a major difference in how they view church nowadays. Community, again, is moving from relational to event-based. Church on Sunday morning has become an event, as opposed to church is my way of life. Discipleship is my way of life. That's one of the things we've been talking about when it comes to discipleship. I'm all in. I am in the story. I'm not reading the story. I'm not watching it fold out, but I'm involved. And in church, that's how it was, right? We were involved in church, and that's why we were there multiple nights a week, and we didn't worry about it. We just did it because it was what we wanted to do and it was what we loved. But now it's like you come on Sunday, everything leads up to the big Sunday service. And, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be like that. I think that our Sunday services are obviously the crux of church culture, and a lot of things are going on there, but we do need to be building relationship still. We can't sacrifice relationship. You should be reaching out as a church. Churches should be reaching out to involve people. And this brings me to my next point, and that's staff-driven ministry replacing member participation. Staff-driven ministry replacing member participation. Now, I know it's different when the church is large. Okay. Coming as a minister that has helped out with smaller churches, churches, our church peaked out at about 75. Okay. I served at a church that had, 250, 300, a couple of different churches that had around that range. And so those churches aren't really that large compared to some of these other churches that are 1,000, 2,000 members. And so obviously from a operations point of view, those churches do have to operate a little differently. But I think that the bigger churches have to remember that people in the pews want to be involved, right? Like you don't, there's more gifting and talent out there than there is on your platform. And I know that might be hard for some churches to stomach, but especially for the larger churches, that is the truth. There's a lot of a gifting out there. There's a lot of talent out there that needs to be cultivated and needs to be utilized. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be your next worship leader. That doesn't mean that they're going to be the next big pastor or preacher or evangelist. They might be gifted in teaching a Sunday school class. They might be gifted at serving in a home group. They might be gifted in organizing events. They might be gifted in helping you reach out to visitors. They might be gifted in helping the church organize prayer groups. There's a numerous amount of things, but those people often get lost in the shuffle because we're putting all of our responsibilities on our staff, our people that are collecting a salary and or on staff full time. And so, we can't do those people that take a salary from the church need to hold their own? Of course they do, right? Of course they do. But it shouldn't be only them. There are volunteers out there that want to help and don't want to, and that don't want to, that want to help, and they want to do more than just help somebody find their seat or greet someone at the front door, right? And so those gifts and those talents need to be cultivated. And I think a lot of people end up feeling disconnected from that point of view. One of the things that I looked at it from a pastoral point of view and even a youth pastoral point of view was that as a pastor, it's my job to cultivate the gifts and the people that God has allowed me to serve. And I want to position them and help them get to places that they couldn't get on their own or they couldn't get in another church. And I think, one of the things that I feel like is a blessing that I see out of the church that we pastored is that so many of the members that were regular at our church and involved in our church went out and are now regular members and helping and volunteering and making impacts in the churches that they're at now. And I like to hope and I pray that the opportunities that they got in our little church have led them to the opportunities that they have now. And I think there's a disconnect there where the bigger churches are missing out on those opportunities by allowing people to sit there, and it's causing people to feel disconnected. You want to do more, you want to be more involved, but you really don't know how, and you don't know what the pathway is, and you don't want to be stuck doing something that you don't really want to do, and hoping that someday someone's going to move you up to do the thing that you actually feel called to do. Generational difference in faith expression. I used a few episodes ago, I talked about my grandfather, Papa Marriott. And I still remember it, and I'll tell it again. But, when in the late 90s and early 2000s, when worship really started to shift in a lot of churches, when it went from the hymnal books, and now we're doing a lot of Hillsong, shout to the Lord and those kind of things. And, Gary Chapman and all those old school, great, early different worship that kind of ushered in a new style. And, Papa Marriott was like, man, all the worship team, all they do is they sing these songs and they say the same thing over and over and over again. We have a new generation of people that have a different taste in music. And, look, the song can be anointed and the words can be powerful, but if the music and the style doesn't resonate, people will shut it off in a heartbeat. Like, I'm sure, and as a person that grew up in the 90s, we look at normal music, church outside of music, and you say, we say things like, oh man, the music was so much better back in the 90s than it is now. Whatever your genre, whatever you say, we all feel that way. Our parents felt that way. Probably our grandparents felt that way too. But they feel this. It's the same thing in church worship music in a lot of ways too. So us that even if we prefer the old style of worship, we've got to be willing to evolve with the newer generation in order to reach them too, and not seclude it. But maybe at the same time, our churches need to find a balance too. And, the church that we attend currently, I think, does an amazing job of mixing in some old school songs with new style. and keeping it all with a great feel and a great flow. So, I think that's one of the things that the church we're currently attending does really well. But a lot of churches are struggling with that because they want to meet the needs of the people. They want to make the members feel comfortable. They want the members to connect and worship. And there might be some people out there that are like, oh man, not this song again. But then there's why do they keep saying the same thing over and over? There might be some older generation folk out there that are saying that, but then there's younger generation that are saying, oh man, not this 1998 song again. So, and look, you might say, well, it's all worship music. Nobody should be saying that. Look, you might be right. Okay. We shouldn't be criticizing, but the truth is that is how people think, whether we want to accept it or not. And it's not just the music, but it's the sermons as well. There is a difference. Our older generation expressed faith different than the newer generation in a lot of ways. Older generation tend to be more loyal. They tend to be more consistent, and they tend to look at being a member of a church as a duty. This is what we do, right? This is not an option. Church is what we do. We go to church on Sundays. We go to church on Wednesdays. We go to church on Sunday night. And if the kids have youth on Friday or Wednesday, they're going to that. Nowadays, the younger generation, what they really want, I think, is they're not looking at church as so much as a duty. They want church and their experience to be authentic. They want it to be real. They want it to touch their hearts. They want it to challenge them intellectually. They want transparency and they want purpose. So, again, the churches have to find a way to meld these two generations together. And at the same time, we need an older generation that's not holding on so tight that they won't let go of the torch, but we need a younger generation that's not trying to yank the torch, so to speak, out of the hand of the older generation sooner than what we really need to. There is a little bit of a transition period taking on. I was thinking the other day, I was looking at, so many of these great preachers and pastors that we've grown up with, they're getting older. A new guard of ministry is coming in, and there is change, and there is a lot of change. And so how are we as a church body, not just a specific church, local church, but just a church body in general, going to navigate these changes with this whole there's a generation of pastors that got us through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and even the 70s, that they're hitting retirement age, and they're going to be passing on their ministries to other younger ministers. And there's definitely a shift that's coming and a change that's already taking place. We don't want to, this conflict too, there's a lot of times between the two ways of thought, there's a little bit of tension, right? Because one group sees it one way, one group sees it another. And a lot of times the misunderstanding of questioning the older generation by the younger generation is often mislabeled as rebellion. And so here's where we've got to be careful. And I think that one of the things that I've learned in my life personally, and I think it would do good for a lot of us to consider, is that, look, when people question you from time to time, they're not taking a shot at you. Okay, they're not throwing a stone at you necessarily. Sometimes people just want clarity. And this younger generation of people, they do process, like I was saying earlier, they process things differently, they think differently, and oftentimes they question and they come off like they might be challenging, but they're not challenging. They're seeking clarity, and they're hoping for authenticity, and they're hoping for a truth to trickle out. Not well, you shouldn't be asking those kind of questions. You just do what you're told, and you'll do it, or you'll like it, right? That's not really resonating with this generation. I think we have to be very open, and I think we have to be transparent, and I think that people want to know in general the good things of the generations past. What are the things that we can carry on to the next level? But at the end of the day, though, when it comes to that tension between the old generation and the new, they might be asking different questions, but the reality is that they're still longing for the same truth. that generational difference. They want the same truth. It might be packaged a little different. It might kind of look a little different and sound a little different, but they still want that same truth that's always been there. Discipleship cannot take a back seat. Okay. 25 years ago, I think churches were big on discipleship. I think church is still big on discipleship, but I think it has to continue to be strong. Church growth is measured nowadays by like numbers. How big is your church? And if you're a minister watching this, I'm sure if you're a pastor watching this, you've been in the rooms with the other preachers. And how many are you running, Doc? You know, how many people you got in your church? It's not about that, okay? Because your church could be full. You could have 1,000 people in your church that are the same they were 10 years ago and have not grown one bit. Is that what you want? No, I would rather have a church of 50 and have people that their lives are changing and continuing to change. They're growing spiritually. They're growing knowledge. They're growing in their gifts. They're growing in their calling. You know, so church, the way we measure church should not be by attendance. It should be by transformation. Now, look, I want to be honest too on that, because I am of the opinion that, look, we are in the business of bringing people to God. So numbers are important. You should see new growth and new members in your local church, but it should not be at the expense of preaching transformative, powerful, doctrinally strong messages that challenge people to change and grow spiritually. We need more intentional life on life discipleship. We need to help people grow. Okay. This is something that I think we're getting away from. We're telling, we've got our 3-point sermon on how to forgive, or how to be more happy, or how to be consistent, or how to be excellent. But I need depth in how to live. And I think that this generation is looking for that. Those are the kinds of questions that they want answered. Spiritual formation, in a lot of ways, and this is a difference, I think, spiritual formation has become more about information, right? As opposed to formation. We need to be setting people up to grow. We need to be setting people up to be pillars for the kingdom of God. And that means that we're teaching them sound doctrine. We're teaching them biblical principles that they can carry into their everyday life, into their families, into their careers, and into their walk with God, that is enriching them to a place that has formation. I can give you information, and and a lot of churches are giving information, but are you telling us how to apply it? And maybe that's a disconnect nowadays. People are getting a lot of information. You're telling me a lot of statistics, and you're telling me this and that, but how do I apply it to my life? That's something that's also very important. And because of that, believers are less equipped to just be blessed in everyday life. Church feels busy, but not spiritual. Okay, that's another thing. Church feels busy, but not spiritual. Yeah, you got a lot going on, but do I have a spiritual connection? And I think this causes a lot of people to look back and wonder, why do things feel so different? Things just don't look the same or feel the same that they do now. And it's because church is busy, but the spirituality of the church has shifted and maybe downshifted a little bit from where it could be. And that happens. We do that in the name of trying to reach more people, or reach a broader amount of people. So those are some of the things that changed. But look, let's talk about some of the things that haven't changed. And here's the deal. The gospel, the truth, has not changed. It is the same. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. The message should not have changed. Jesus' call to follow him hasn't shifted. The way the style of worship music might have shifted. The style of preaching might have shifted. Churches might not be as good at building relationships. Members might not be as good as being committed and loyal, but the message has not changed. The call to follow the Lord is still the same. The need for community is still the same. The need for sound doctrine and truth is still the same. The need for purpose is still the same. Guys, we are in a generation that is so hungry and thirsty for purpose. And we, as believers of the true God, Jesus, our Savior, have the answer to purpose. The enemy is attacking identity at every single corner. We need to be out here providing wisdom and purpose to these people that want identity and purpose. God is still building his church. God is still building his church. Even in this change from an older generation to a younger generation, God is still building the church. God is still moving. God is still doing miraculous things. And we can't forget that that's happening. Now, what does this mean for disciples? What does this mean for believers? What does this mean for everyday churchgoers like you and me? The call and the need for discipleship is stronger than ever. Who are you mentoring right now? Who is mentoring you? Who are you checking up on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis? Do you have a few people on your list? Do you have a few people that are doing that for you, that are calling you up and saying, hey, man, how are you doing? Hey, sis, what's going on in your life right now? Can I pray for you? How are you doing spiritually? How are you doing emotionally? How are you doing mentally? We need that connection. We need that connection, but we need to encourage people to discipleship. Faith can't be outsourced to institutions. Listen, I've said it before, I'm blessed to be able to teach at a Christian private school, and we do our best to model and guide these young people to have a desire to deepen their relationship with God. But family, you can't put it on the school. You can't put it on the church only. You need to have it going on in your own home as well. The church doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be meaningful. Okay. Church doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be meaningful. And this is something that I think a lot of churches need to remind themselves of. A lot of pastors need to remind themselves. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to have meaning, and you need to provide purpose, and you need to challenge your people to be disciples and follow God and grow their relationship with him to new levels that they've never been before. And so, don't get so caught up on making everything just this perfect production that we miss out and don't give time for God, the Holy Spirit, to move on people's hearts and touch people's minds. Healthy faith does require commitment and patience. And, if you're in a church and you're feeling like you're, like, man, I wish it was the way it was 20 to 25 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago. Look, be patient, stay faithful, support. Don't let this thought of, well, the church is not meeting my needs because everything doesn't sound or look the way it did when felt like I was at my peak. We've got to learn to change with it in certain ways, as long as it's not sacrificing the message, as long as it's not sacrificing sound doctrine, as long as it's not sacrificing the truth. Again, the method of church might change, the style of worship, the style of preaching, but as long as the truth remains, the message is at the forefront, discipleship is ingrained in the culture of the church, it's going to be all right, and it's going to work out. God is going to work through that. We're called to engage. You're not called to withdraw. And so if you're one of those people that's like, man, I long for the old days, man, you still need to be involved. You still need to be involved in your church and helping out in any way that you can, because your church needs you. And the truth is, Your church needs you. It doesn't matter how big it is. You might be going to a mega church. You might be going to a church that's got 30 or 40 people, but that church needs you. They need you to help serve. They need you to use your gift and your talent that God has blessed you with to help and meet the needs of the other members, because that's what the church is really about. It's about community, and it's about serving one another. Now, as we get ready to close out this episode, I want to ask you a few questions, and I want you to really take heart to these, and I want you to think about them. The first one is, am I comparing church to a memory, or am I comparing it to Scripture? Am I comparing church, how it is now, to a memory of what church used to be, or am I comparing it to Scripture? Think about that for a minute, okay? Because, again, with all this change, a lot of these things are just peripheral. We need to be comparing our churches to the Scripture. Are they doctrinally sound? Is God being put first? Are we pushing for evangelism and discipleship, spiritual growth, those types of things? The next one, this is important too. Ask yourself this: Am I participating, or am I spectating? Am I participating, or am I spectating? See, it's easy to be very critical when you're only spectating, but when you've got skin in the game and you are volunteering, or you are working, or you are involved on a level that is deeper than just sitting in the pews and watching, your point of view changes very much. And so I want to encourage you, think about that too when you're longing for those old days, or wondering what happened to the good old days. Have you gotten to a place in your life where maybe you're no longer participating, you're just spectating? The last question I want you to think about is, where might God be inviting you to have a deeper faith in this season of your life? Maybe you're in a place where, you are a little bit more reflective, and you are looking back at years gone by and wondering, where has the time gone? And things seem so much more spiritual back then. I think if you're honest in your reflections, you'll see that maybe God is trying to pull you to have a deeper walk with Him and trust your faith a little bit more than maybe you had in those seasons past. The church is an important part of our walks with God. I believe that. But at the same time, guys, you need to have your own personal walk with God, and you need to see, is God trying to pull me closer right now? So look, remember, church may feel different, but the invitation, the message remains the same. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is still building the church. God is still building your church, our church, whatever. Let Him do it. Things might be changing. Things might be evolving. The preachers might be playing little clips on their big, giant digital screens nowadays. It's just so different. But just roll with the punches for a little bit. Let them be a little creative. Remember, there's a whole other generation of people out there that are processing things so much differently than the older generation did. We got to reach everybody. We gotta figure out a way to bring everything together. And what's God doing in your life? Hey, I just want to say thank you for being with me today. I hope something that I said was thought-provoking and a blessing to you, or an encouragement to you. If you really have been enjoying these sermons, I want you, if you could, or these podcasts, I really would like it if you could just give it a like, maybe a share. That would really be a blessing to me. Maybe put a comment down below. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you to all of those that have been reaching out and telling me that they've enjoyed it. Thank you so much. It's really been a blessing to me to be able to kind of get out and kind of speak regularly to a different audience. I get to preach every day to my Bible classes, but this is a whole other avenue that I've been working on. So please continue to pray for me. I'll be praying for you. Remember, discipleship first, Faith Unwavered. Stand strong in everything that you do. Let God do the rest. God bless you. We'll see you next time.